Oh, thank you for being with us today. Today we have Michael Cordua, the founder and president of Cordua Restaurants. Michael, we're so glad to have you here and want to hear more about you and not just the restaurants and your idea for starting Cordua Restaurants. And what I would really like you to start with, though, is why did you choose Houston?
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for having me here. Houston chose me. I did not choose Houston, so I'm kind of a reluctant immigrant. I came to school to Texas A&M in 1976 from Nicaragua to study banking, and with all the intention of going back home and become a banker. But in my junior year in 1979, we had a revolution, and Nicaragua became a communist country. So banks were nationalized, and I would have to become a communist bureaucrat to be in banking, and that was not part of my plan. So instead, I stayed in Houston and worked in the maritime shipping business for some years.
Really? Oh my gosh. And what brought you to the restaurant business?
Well, in the early 80s, the price of oil went down to $10, which is comparable to the slide we had down to 30 not a couple of years ago. So shipping practically stopped. I mean, Houston is the capital of the world when it comes to oil field equipment and drilling. And so the owner of the company closed down the office and gave us all a severance package. And I did not see myself as out of a job, more so like out of a career. And at the ripe age of 26, I took a sabbatical. And my life had been going like full revolution, and it stopped all of a sudden. And when you have that moment, then you don't panic, but rather you use that time to discern, what is your passion, what is your vocation. And it's very easy to tell somebody what you don't like, but it's very hard to find out what is it that you really want. What's in your heart, what does your heart desire? And through that discernment, I was able to align my passion, which was serving. What I did with my time off was cook. I would cook and serve my friends and my family. The leap of faith was to believe that I could make a living doing it, right? I mean, most people play golf for fun and they go to work, I would go to work and cook for friends. That's how I relax. And when I took that, leap of faith, and for me, having studied to be a banker and being in the shipping business, dealing with ship owners in London and in Norway, and all the very high-flying life at a very young age, it was very humbling to accept that what I really liked to do was to cook. It was very parochial. But when I lowered my head to make it through that door, because my big head couldn't make it, I found all these blessings on the other side. And it was at a time where chefs were not heard of. I mean, mostly you had immigrants working in the back of the kitchen, and not yet the James Beard Awards or the celebrity chefs, none of that. And I found my calling.
Oh, that's amazing. So who, was it your mother or your father, you think, that influenced you being a cook? Either one? Or?
It's interesting. The love dynamic at home was my dad loved to be served, and my mom loved him by cooking and serving. Now, in a typical Latin American home, it's not the stay-at-home mom that cooks, but she kind of is the orchestrator. She organizes, she plans the menu, the events, and she came from a family of good cooks. So going to my grandparents' house on Sundays was like you would see in the movies, the Italian families. Same thing, but in Latin America, supposed to be in Europe. And so I grew up with a good palate. I mean, I knew what good food was and what attentiveness meant, and how you could love and show love through service and cooking. So I would say out of that dynamic is that my passion for serving came.
How a few of us probably are doing really our passion like you are. I really salute you, and to be so resilient to come right back and be so successful. So, but in choosing Houston, was it because you had friends here, or you just saw the market was better than?
Well, my father in Nicaragua was in maritime shipping as well. And so he had recommended that after I finished in A&M, I would go to Mexico and train with the brokers, the ship brokers that were there. And because of the exile and the revolution, I was working in a cafeteria in College Station in Civisa, which is the largest cafeteria in A&M, not cooking so much as warehousing. Again, humbly, right? I did not be wearing a hairnet and an apron in front of my friends at school, so I would work in the back. And I became very good friends with the manager. And the manager had been offered a job in Houston in a shipping company. And he said, Michael, I have no interest in moving to Houston. You're going to Mexico to train. Why don't you train in Houston? It's a fourth largest port in America. You're going to get much better experience. So I came and applied for the job, and that's how I ended up in here.
That's wonderful, and it sounds like that you have many people that you have mentored, including your son. He's joining you in the business now?
Yes, David also went to school. Well, I would say in his heart, he's a musician. He composes, writes, performs, and he's pretty good at it. And my advice to him was like, study business so that you get to keep the benefit of your efforts as opposed to somebody else. Don't make the wrong deal. And so he did. He went to school in Santa Clara in California for finance. And it's a Jesuit university, and the Jesuits make you do social service. So he had to work community hours. And he went to work in a soup kitchen, you would say. And he would call me up, Dad, I have $200 and 500 people. What can I feed them? And so we would talk on the phone, and he kind of got the hang of that immediate gratification of, again, the loving service. And upon graduation, he says, Dad, I want to pursue this. And so we talked about it. Do you go, for example, to the East and become an expert in Asian food? At the time, this was in the early 2000s. So Asian food and Asian fusion was very popular, the sushis. And he says, I would recommend you go back to Europe and get the fundamentals. Because once you know the fundamentals, you can do whatever you want. And so indeed, he went to the Cordon Bleu in Paris, was there for about a year and a half. Got his grand diploma, and then worked for another year and a half, and then went to California, worked there for a while, and then in 2007 he joined the company.
Really? Well, I'm so glad to hear that we won out
very
over California.
Creative. Yeah. Yes.
Because what young person doesn't like that lifestyle there? But how did you come up with the different concepts?
Well, interesting. The first one, churrascos, it was an accident. I had grown up in Nicaragua going to a restaurant called Los Ranchos. And during the revolution, the families that owned the restaurant moved to Miami, and they opened Los Ranchos in Miami. And there was the Nicaraguan exile community, and they had the Cuban exile community. And Nicaragua had been very welcoming to the Cubans during the Castro Revolution in the early 60s. And the Cubans returned the favor, and they were very welcome to the Nicaraguan community in the 80s during the Sandinista Revolution. And so their restaurants were very successful, both with the exile community from Nicaragua as well as the Cuban. And my wife's family was living in Miami, and I would go visit them. And to that point, I had such nostalgia for the food that I would fast and skip breakfast so that I could have a churrascos as an appetizer and another churrasco for lunch, for the entree. And so the first idea of going from the ships, into the restaurant was going to be a franchise from a restaurant called El Novillo in Florida, here in Houston. And long story short, when I the clients taste, we haven't opened yet on American people, of the steak, they tell me, oh, Michael, this is a good fajita. And I feel a dagger going through my heart. I'm not going to serve fajitas. I mean, this is a churrasco. And what it was, they were using, the meat in Nicaragua comes from Brahman. The Brahman cattle, it's grown there because of the tropics. It's a very strong, very beefy animal, but it's not known for tenderness or for marbling. And so what they found was similar were cow tenders. You breed cows for milk, and then when they don't produce much milk, then you send them to the slaughterhouse. They found that meat to be similar, and so it was a complete emergency turnaround. So we cannot be serving cow tenders here in Texas. This is Texas country, this is beef country. And so we switched to the grass-fed that we do here in Texas, but then we finished the last 4 months with grain, corn-fed, and grains, and that's where you get the marbling and the tenderness, and you select the Angus beef, which is a much more tender steer. But what happens, our cost would double. And so the franchisor says, there's no way you're going to make it. Let's just call it here even. You pay the fee and you don't owe us anymore, but you cannot use the name, right? And so churrascos was the namesake of the dish that I wanted. And of course, it had no meaning back then. I mean, now you think of the Brazilian churrascarias, which are not related, but that's how we came up with the first churrascos. Primarily, trying to serve the food that I missed when I was growing up. And there were other eateries around town from Puerto Rico, from Guatemala. I mean, little eateries, mom and pop operations. But they were doing the Monday through Friday cuisine. For example, would be like if you were serving meatloaf. I was trying to serve the Sunday cuisine, like what I ate when I went to visit my grandmother on the weekends, or what my mom served when it was somebody's birthday, so the special cuisine. And what I ran into was that our food, when it was elegant, it was very continental. You know, if it was something that was criollo, something that was indigenous to us, it was considered street food. And so the thought was how to elevate our food to the level that was served in a continental context. And so the first thing that I ran into with a lot of our food was like in potages, where you don't know what the ingredients are. So here you are eating a foreign cuisine that you can't tell the ingredients. I mean, that's a recipe for failure. So there was a lot of deconstruction and separation of the ingredients. And when I found out that, you know, there was not dishes that I could just transfer from Latin America to here, that's when the creation began. And a deep understanding of the ingredients and how America meaning from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, not just America, the US, we are all Americans, and how we changed the way the world ate. You know, most people will think of tomatoes and zucchini, and you would say Italian, you know, but both of those are American. You know, French fries are not Irish or French, you know, they're Americans. Tapioca, it's not Asian, and tapioca is yuca, that, you know, it's all vanilla, chocolate, and the list is huge, you know, of the ingredients that we gave to the world. And so I began this task of almost becoming a cultural ambassador, anthropology and cultural mixed together to celebrate our culture. That there was more than just the labor that you saw. I mean, have you seen The Day Without a Mexican, the movie?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
sort of like there's Nobel Prize winners down there. I mean, there's a lot of culture, a lot of art, and kind of like serving not just the food, but who we were at the restaurants. And so Churrasco's was first predominantly, you know, with South American indigenous flavors. America's what it did, it took it a little higher, less defined by the South. So it was more inclusive of also North America as well. And then through the catering company, and when we had Artista, it's less bounded. So kind of we have let geography dictate the frame that we're painting on.
But all of the brands, I see your passion. I mean, it's amazing, and I hope that someday that you'll write a book. Have you thought about that?
We have one. It's called Cordua, Flavor of the Americas.
Oh, is
yes.
it? Oh my gosh! Well,
Yeah.
we'll have to get you to come and be a speaker, and we'll have a book signing then.
Thank you.
When did you publish it?
About 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry that I missed that, but I did hear you mention, and I hear your passion for your family and all. But I did hear you mention your wife. Tell us how y'all met.
Oh my
What
God.
was that?
So you have to go back to 1930 to a boarding school in Nicaragua with the Jesuits. My dad would come from San Juan del Sur, which is a very popular beach town nowadays in the south of Nicaragua. My father-in-law would come from the north of Nicaragua, Corinto, the agricultural area. And in the middle, in Granada, it was a school, a boarding school. So you would spend 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time in school living together. And they were not rooms, they were hallways. I mean, the beds were like 30 or 40 hallways beds in a hall. And they were classmates in the 1930s. And then Lucia's older brothers and my older brothers also went to the same boarding school.
Oh.
So I've known Lucia since I'm 8 years old.
Oh.
And when I was about 13, I told a friend, I'm gonna marry that girl. And we never dated. We never dated until after the revolution. She came to College Station to visit her brother.
Wow.
And by then she had put some meat on her bones, and I said, wow, she's still looking good. And so we got married very young. I tell people I got married on my first communion suit, and she was on her first communion dress, you know, babies.
And how old were you?
21.
21.
21,
Oh, my
yeah.
gosh. And how many children now?
David is our oldest, and then we have Michelle, Elisa, and Christina. So we have 4 kids and 5 granddaughters. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, we hope that you'll visit all of the restaurants, and I know we could be here all day and talking. Is there anything else? I would like you to look at the camera, and really, if there's one word that you can describe yourself, or choose a word that you think that you most admire in a person.
I think their ability to love. I think we don't use that word enough, the L word. I was in a meeting this morning and somebody said the axiom that we need to learn to listen so that we learn when we listen. And I think in speaking, having a conversation with women, us men have a problem that we tend to value the loud voice, the assertive presence, and we miss half of the truth when we ignore the way a woman communicates. And I think we all be better off if we learn to listen better and listen with love.
Oh my gosh. Well, I see why she fell in love with you then. Oh,
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you again.